What makes someone truly clean before God? Is it religious rituals, traditions, or something deeper? In Mark 7, Jesus challenges the religious leaders, exposing the danger of empty traditions. Then he shows us an unexpected example of radical faith in a Gentile woman. These stories aren't just ancient history. They have real implications for how we live out our life today. Hey, welcome to By Grace Through Faith. I'm your host, Bree. Today we're continuing in Mark and we're jumping into Mark 7, where we're going to talk about first how Jesus confronts the Pharisees, talking about the heart over traditions. Let's begin by reading verse 1 through 5. One day some Pharisees and teachers of the religious law arrived from Jerusalem to see Jesus. They noticed that some of their disciples failed to follow the Jewish ritual of hand washing before eating. The Jews, especially the Pharisees, do not eat until they have poured water over their cupped hands. This is required by their ancient traditions. Similarly, they don't eat anything from the market until they immerse their hands in water. This is but one of the many traditions they have clung to, such as their ceremonial washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. Next, Jesus is going to respond with a sharp rebuke. Let's continue with verses 6 through 8. Jesus replied, "You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you, for he wrote, 'These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship is a farce, for they teach man-made ideas as commands from God. For you ignore God's law and substitute your own traditions.'" Now, the Pharisees, they're trying to catch Jesus in something. They've been, of course, attempting this for the period of time that Jesus has been teaching. They're trying to catch him in breaking the law of Moses or the Mosaic law. However, Jesus points out that the Pharisees are hypocrites, and that's for two reasons. One, their actions don't come from their hearts. This is actually not in the Mosaic law. This is more so of a Jewish tradition that they have created. And secondly, this is not coming from God, but again, their own teaching. The Pharisees are deciding what is right. I heard a pastor say, actually this past Sunday, and when he was teaching on another passage about the Pharisees, that the Pharisees like to have a monopoly on God. They know just enough about God to confuse people and to make sure that they're following what they describe is what you should be doing, not necessarily what's within the law. So tradition is taking over what we should really be focusing on, and that's just following God. So let's continue in verses 9 through 13, where Jesus then expands on his teaching. Then he said, "You skillfully sidestep God's law in order to hold on to your own tradition. For instance, Moses gave you this law from God: honor your father and mother, and anyone who speaks disrespectfully of father or mother must be put to death. But you say it is all right for people to say to their parents, 'Sorry, I can't help you, for I have vowed to give to God what I have given to you.' In this way, you let them disregard their needing parents. And so you cancel the word of God in order to hand down your own tradition. And this is only one example among many others." So that is one of the 10 commandments, to honor your father and your mother. And going back even further into Jewish tradition, there was a responsibility in the Jewish faith to take care of your parents, and that's from a financial and a personal level. In the Jewish tradition, there were actually funds that were originally supposed to be dedicated to the care of parents. However, the Pharisees, they declared that this fund would be korban, and that's a Hebrew term, and it means legally dedicated to God. So basically, you could be a child of your parents and you had this fund that was meant to take care of your parents, but instead, because the Pharisee says, "Oh, you can dedicate that money to God," Jesus is saying you allowed for people to actually break the law for your own tradition, or maybe not even break the law, but break tradition that was actually good to do for your own self. Again, showing how hypocritical the Pharisees actually are. You're only abiding by what you want to abide by, and you're looking for traditions to be upheld rather than what Jesus came to ultimately do, make sure that you have a relationship with God above all else. So then next, Jesus calls the crowd and he makes a radical statement about what truly defiles a person. And we can see that in verses 14 through 16. Then Jesus called to the crowd to come and hear. All of you listen, he said, and try to understand. It's not what goes into your body that defiles you. You are defiled by what comes from your heart. Then Jesus went into a house to get away from the crowd, and his disciples asked him what he meant by the parable he had just used. And let's read his explanation, finishing in verse 23. Don't you understand either? He asked. Can't you see that the food you put into your body cannot defile you? Food doesn't go into your heart, but only passes through your stomach and then goes into the sewer. By saying this, he declared that every kind of food is acceptable in God's eyes. And then he added, it is what comes from inside you that defiles you. For from within, out of a person's heart comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, lustful desires, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these vile things come from within. They are what defile you. Let's think about this. How often do we judge our spiritual health by external measures? Church attendance, Bible reading time, or avoiding certain behaviors? While at the same time, we could be jealous of our neighbor, have a lot of pride about a situation, or resentful about something that happened in our past. Jesus is calling us to examine our hearts, not just our habits. Now, this confrontation challenges us to reflect on our own spiritual practices. Are we like the Pharisees, meticulously following certain religious routines, but at the same time neglecting the condition of our hearts? Jesus is inviting us to a deeper authenticity, where our outward actions flow because we have a genuine inner transformation. Let's consider the traditions or practices that you value in your faith now. Maybe it is daily devotions, serving at your church, or avoiding certain behaviors. Now, these can be good, but I encourage you to ask yourself, have any of these things become mere rituals that don't necessarily reflect what's truly happening in your heart? Are you more concerned with how others perceive your faith than you are with your actual relationship with God? Are you going through the motions and doing it by practice because you're quote unquote supposed to do it? Or are you doing it out of the gladness of your heart because you're trying to have a true connection with God? Remember, Jesus wasn't against all traditions. He was against traditions that replace genuine devotion to God. The issue wasn't about the hand washing itself, but that these external practices had become substitutes for genuine righteousness. God is after your heart. Jesus is after your heart. He's not after your traditions and these things that you feel like are more valuable. So let's make sure that we're approaching things from a genuine stance of righteousness. So how do we apply these teachings to our lives? Let's think about 3 practical steps. First, it's important to examine your heart regularly. Take time at the end of each day and ask, what motivated my actions today? What were the reasons that I did whatever I did today? Were my spiritual practices done out of my love for God, or was it simply to impress others? Am I able to say at the end of the week, oh yeah, I had my devotion every day. I spent all this time. What is it for at the end of the day? Second, prioritize heart transformation over rule following. Instead of focusing solely on external behaviors, invest in practices that transform your inner life, like confession, gratitude, and meditating on God's character. Third, evaluate your traditions. For each spiritual practice, you must ask, does this draw me closer to God, or has it become an empty ritual? You need to be willing to adjust or even abandon that practice if it's lost its meaning, because it needs to have meaning. It needs to have a connection and ultimately bring you closer to God. Now, after this intense debate, Jesus travels to the region of Tyre. Let's read what happens next in verses 24 through 26. Then Jesus left Galilee and went north to the region of Tyre. He didn't want anyone to know which house he was staying in, but he couldn't keep it a secret. Right away, a woman who had heard about him came and fell at his feet. Her little girl was possessed by an evil spirit, and she begged him to cast out the demon from her daughter. Now let's look at this surprising interaction in verses 27 through 30. Jesus told her, "First, I should feed the children, my own family, the Jews. It isn't right to take food from my children and throw it to the dogs." She replied, "That's true, Lord, but even the dogs under the table are allowed to eat the scraps from the children's plates." This woman is persistent, and it can remind us that sometimes faith means pressing on even when the circumstance seems discouraging. Like her, we may face moments where God's response isn't what we expected, but our continued trust can lead through a breakthrough. And then Jesus replies, "Good answer," he said. "Now go home, for the demon has left your daughter." And when she arrived home, she found her little girl was lying quietly in bed, and the demon was gone. This Gentile woman's story invites us to reflect on our own faith journey. How do we respond when God seems silent or when his answer isn't what we expect? The woman faced what initially appeared to be rejection, yet she persisted with humility and determination. Why don't you consider a time when you prayed for something important and didn't receive the answer you wanted? Did you give up? Did you become bitter? Or did you, like this woman, continue to trust in God's goodness despite the circumstances? Also, notice how this woman wasn't entitled or demanding. She approached Jesus with such humility, acknowledging his authority while still boldly making her request. Her faith wasn't based on her worthiness, but on Jesus' ability and his compassion. So how can we develop this own kind of persistent faith in our own lives? Here are a couple practices. 1, you have to be honest with God about your needs. Sometimes we can come from this perspective of, well, he's God, he should know everything. But he's wanting us to be honest with him. This woman doesn't hide her desperation. She brought her real need directly to Jesus. This is also a form of surrender. It's showing that, God, I want to come to you boldly and with my vulnerability and just not hiding anything because I really need you in this moment and I trust you. God is looking for our honesty with him. 2nd, make sure you persist in prayer even when the answer seems delayed. Keep bringing your requests to God, trusting in his timing and his wisdom. Your prayers are not just hitting the ceiling. Your prayers do not mean anything. God is looking for your hearts. He's looking for you to chase after him. God is looking for your heart, and he's looking for you to be persistent. So keep praying, keep seeking, keep knocking, and God hears your prayers. 3rd, make sure you approach God with both humility and boldness. Like this woman, recognize God's authority while confidently asking for what you need. Even when God's response seems like a no, it might be an invitation to press in even further with even greater faith. Next, Jesus travels to another region. Let's see what happens in verses 31 through 32. Jesus left Tyre and went to Sidon before going back to the Sea of Galilee and the region of the 10 towns. A deaf man with a speech impediment was brought to him, and the people begged Jesus to lay his hands on the man to heal him. Now let's see how Jesus heals the man in verses 33 through 35. Jesus led him away from the crowd so they could be alone. He put his finger into the man's ears. Then, spitting on his own fingers, he touched the man's tongue. Looking up to heaven, he sighed and said, "Ephatha," which means be opened. Instantly, the man could hear perfectly, and his tongue was freed so he could speak plainly. Finally, let's read the people's reaction in verses 36 through 37. Jesus told the crowd not to tell anyone, but the more he told them not to, the more they spread the news. They were completely amazed and said again and again, "Everything he does is wonderful. He even makes the deaf to hear and gives speech to those who cannot speak." What's powerful here is Jesus' personal, compassionate approach. He doesn't just heal from a distance, he meets the man in his need, touching him in a way that speaks to his condition. This healing follows directly from the story of the Gentile woman, showing how Jesus' compassion extends beyond cultural boundaries to everyone who seeks him in faith. Now, this healing miracle, it can invite us to reflect on how Jesus works in our own lives. Notice the personal, intimate nature of this healing. Jesus could have healed with a word from a distance, but instead he chose to touch this man's ears and tongue directly. He connected with him in a specific way, with his specific need, in a way that communicated care and understanding. I want you to think of ways that you can feel similar to the man who needed a healing. Is there areas in your life where you feel spiritually deaf or mute? Are you struggling to hear God's voice or unable to speak truth effectively? Now, how might Jesus be reaching out to touch you in those specific areas of your life in need? Also, consider the significance of Jesus taking the man aside privately. Sometimes our deepest healing happens not in a public space, but in intimate moments alone with Jesus, away from the people, the crowds, and the performance. I encourage you to seek Jesus in that private time so you can see in those areas that you need healing that he's able to do that. He's able to heal in every circumstance and every setting. And how can we apply this story to our spiritual journey? Here are a couple of ways. First, like I said, identify your area of deafness and muteness. See where you struggle to hear God or speak his truth and bring that to Jesus. Second, create that private space to have that encounter with Jesus. Set aside time to meet with him alone, away from distractions, where deep healing can occur. Third, pay attention to Jesus' unique methods in your life. Just as he used touch, spit, different methods that seemed unusual, he may work in unexpected ways in your life as well. Be open to his personal approach and how he decides to heal you. As we read through Mark 7 together, we've seen how Jesus challenges us to examine our hearts. Are we caught up in the empty traditions like the Pharisees, or are we truly transformed from the inside out? Do we have the persistent faith of the Gentile woman, trusting in Jesus even when the answer isn't immediate? Do we even recognize the personal touch of Jesus in our lives, just as the deaf man did? These stories remind us that authentic faith isn't about following rules or maintaining certain appearances. It's about the heart transformation, keeping persistent trust, and receiving Jesus' personal touch in our everyday lives. As we apply these lessons, may we, like the crowd, declare that he has done everything well in our own lives. And that leads us to our reflection question. Do you focus more on an outward appearance of faith or on genuine transformation? Evaluate where you are. Next time, we're going to dive into Mark 8, where Jesus feeds 4,000 people and he challenges his disciples about what it truly means to follow him. I'll see you next time. Bye.